Tuba Geyikler received her BA, MA, and PhD in American Culture and Literature from Ankara University in 1998, 2001, and 2008, respectively. Prior to taking her position at Yaşar, she taught at Ankara University. Her research focuses on the connections between myths and literature by contemporary indigenous authors in the United States. Among her current research projects are a study on the Southern Gothic literature of the United States and a cognitive literary study of magical realism in postmodern Turkish novels. She tries to justify her obsession with video games by trying her hand at writing an article on new forms of narrative such as game lit RPG, am I okay? And interactive fiction. Her published translations include Geç Kapıdan Körebe, Human Croquet, and Köpeğimi Alıp Erkenden, Started Early, Took My Dog by Kate Atkinson. She's the mother of the best person she has ever met, I agree that, and a crazy Tibetan spaniel. And last but not least, for the last 23 years, she has taught to members of Generation Y and Z. Okay, that's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so the floor is yours, Tuba. And I forgot to add, this is another talk as part of the seminar series organized by the MA Institute of Yaşar University. And I'm just welcoming you all. Tuba's talk will be continued with a Q&A. So she's going to be with us, and the chat is also available. You can write your questions if you need to, and then we will talk. So let's go on with Tuba. Thank you, Tuba.
Thank you. Thank you, Evren, and thank you everybody once more for being here. Am I allowed to share my screen, Evren?
You should be, because you're a panelist, right, Evren?
Yeah, it reads, yes. Sorry, it reads host disabled participant screen sharing, although I participated as panelist.
Oh, it should be easy to fix. Evren, can you do that?
I've done it. Tuba Hocam, can you try?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm sharing my screen, and I'm sharing the paper. Perhaps it would be easier for you to follow. Perhaps some of the words are Spanish, and my Spanish is not good at all. Therefore, you would like to see the words, and I don't know. It's better than seeing me anyhow. And this talk is part of two seemingly different larger studies related to how we recognize spaces we inhabit. One of those studies is about how we experience digitally engineered spaces in video games. The other is about spaces as they are created in contemporary fiction by authors, self-defined by multiple identities. Both my studies lead me to a point that we may perceive space in relation to how we experience our existence as individuals. What I will share today with you is a map of how I read literature to see how literary characters and carefully chosen real-world settings are fictionally positioned back to back or face to face, if you like, tightly tied to one another with thick natural sailor's knots, deepen the readings of problematic experiences of identification that's more than one identity, a strategy used in the works of immigrant authors or authors who have inherited the complications of immigrancy. To do that, I have chosen a Chicana novel, Ana Castillo's So Far From God, and a novel originally written in Turkish by Latife Tekin, Sevgili Arsız Ölüm, which was translated to English as Dear Shameless Death by Saliha Paker and Mel Ken. By the meantime, Chicana is a neologism that has come to be understood as a politically oriented female Mexican American. Gloria Anzaldua's unparalleled work on the issue, Borderlands La Frontera, the New Mestiza, though its own in-between nature of poetical and theoretical, through its own in-between nature of poetical and theoretical, helps me in this particular work that I am sharing with you. Tome, the setting of So Far From God, seems to be a reality effect at first sight for the unfamiliar eyes. However, in that reality, the village is defined as an unincorporated, census-designated place, popularly. That sounds complicated at first, though it just means for the government, the data of the place is determined by comparison to a similar incorporated village without an actual survey. Meaning, for governmental authority, Tome exists, but does not exist at the same time, at least not as it really is. Because of this peculiar nature of in-betweenness, Tome is the perfect setting for the almost allegorical Mexican-American characters, such as Sophie, wisdom, and her daughters Esperanza, hope, fe, faith, caridad, charity, and La Loca, crazy. They lead their mythically empowered, but truly disprivileged lives there. The narrative itself, like Anzaldua's nonfiction, is bilingual. The healings by both doctors and traditional curanderas, healers, require both hospitals and herbs besides some magic. A modern Santa in her jeans uses her pickup until she finds her cave to spend a whole year as a hermit. Mexican machismo, strong or aggressive masculine pride, is a reality, but those good-for-nothing husbands are impossible to resist when they decisively use their charm. Alajuvek village, on the other hand, in Dear Shameless Death, which until the arrival of the very first bus at the beginning of the novel is known to be a place no one leaves and very rarely visited by someone new. The village is so isolated and disowned in a way that the villagers change the name of it according to random circumstances. Alajuvek receives its real-life name, Akçalı, when the progressive villager Huvat puts his mind to changing it to Atom. Obviously, the other villagers with more common sense convince Huvat to retrieve his offer. So Akçalı, with its new name, is there on the map as a village of Bünyan, Kayseri. But the maps show neither the hobgoblins nor haunting jinns, whose residences in Anatolian folklore are known to be thresholds. Latife Tekin's Akçalı is a place where Dirmit, the protagonist, can speak to a hand pump, and the hand pump reveals where to find the budding roses. That is also where Sarıkız, a man-eater jinn with her long, beautiful hair to her feet, dwells in her lair. The degree of verisimilitude of these two novels of similar experiences is challenged by local legends, superstitions, semi-traditional religious rituals, myths, and miracles. The cognition of the reader is forced to multiply the meaning of the narratives in both cases. When the logic translates the fictional incidents taking place in real settings to tragic isolation of people with no means, the magic realism empowers and shields the same characters with uncanny characteristics of legendary misfits, creatures of in-between, saints appointed by the village folk instead of religious institutions. Only through suffering of not belonging these characters are able to inhabit the homeland that Anzaldúa called borderland. The alien element separating these characters from the rest of the society becomes familiar, as she calls it. Never comfortable, she says, not with society's clamor to uphold the old, to rejoin the flock, to go with the herd. No, not comfortable, but home. Anzaldúa calls this familiar home a borderland, a vague and undetermined place created by the emotional residue of an unnatural boundary. The forsaken Tome and Alajvik therefore communicate their otherwise hidden supernatural qualities only with their faithful residents. Sometimes those residents find themselves in the reality of others and in real settings. Governmental institutions in both novels are used as representatives of alienating domination. They intrude the mythical tone of the narratives to highlight the reality they drag behind is not for the benefit of the characters. This time, dysfunctioning police forces, disinterested parliament members, and schools without wisdom stand for the antagonistic forces. Now we can take a closer look at the idea of how these settings represent the ideal home for the fictional population of these two novels, together with many others. Whichever way you slice it, Lonely Planet does not have an Alajvik volume. Tome might have had, but only because it is the best place for reenacting the sufferings of Jesus, including the crucifixion. So what makes home out of these dystopic spaces, crowded with folkloric horrors like jinns, the threshold dwellers, and Malogra or Malaora basically means evil hour, a crossroads dweller. Perhaps the question should be changed to something like, why do these characters feel at home, where the mythic natives are ubiquitous and of double nature? Anzaldúa's description of her family's religious practices explains this curiosity a lot. She writes, "My family, like most Chicanos, did not practice Roman Catholicism, but a folk Catholicism with many pagan elements. La Virgen de Guadalupe's Indian name is Cuatlalopeu. She is the central deity connecting us to our Indian ancestry." She then explains how male-dominated Azteca Mexican culture, the circumstances by the Spanish conquest, and the later Nahuan manipulation have mangled this central goddess into pieces and desexed her and mixed her with Roman Catholic myths of femininity. So out of one goddess, centuries-old dominances create La Virgen de Guadalupe, Virgen Maria, chaste virgins, basically, and Tlazolteotl, Coatlica, La Chingada, putas in Spanish, prostitutes in English. This story of transformation may seem irrelevant at first. However, in indigenous cultures, these myths are earthbound. They are local and their roots connect their believers to the land they reside, or vice versa. The peoples who have been creating such myths outpour and transfer their inherent connection to their homeland, to their deities. Therefore, like Earth, the supreme beings are expected to nurture, bring up, let down, inspire, seduce, swallow, and debone. Only then they become trustworthy. Only then they feel true. The venerated land watches its people suffer. Their tears interflow with the underflows. Only then people, this time, become trustworthy and worthy of performing miracles. The land allows them to share the skills of the creatures of in-between. Such characters ascend above the others in pitiful grace. The land is almost personified in the habits of Kepse, the jinn that Alajubek people believe for a time possesses Hubat, because he brings all those weird things to the village from big cities: a bus, a hand pump, a radio, a headstrong wife. I tried to translate the definition of Kepse, although I believe this one narrative is one of those impossible to translate. I tried my hand. This jinn, Kepse, is infamous for the habit of visiting, first in the form of high fever, then don't let me start, how he possessed shivers and sweats, then he comes out of nowhere and clunk, he slumps against your chest. He is a coal black thing, a ball of wool with lenticular eyes, without hands and feet. Let's say you capture him, he is enslaved. He waits hand and foot. You can't, forget about him. He'll run away and you can never see him again. Kepse is a good example of how the earth and people relationship is magically created in folklore and how they are recycled in contemporary literature. The powers of earth, the land itself, a glorious sandbox to put the characters to ultimate tests and to reward them with uncanny divine gifts. To conclude with a very short note, and for the sake of finding a relevant response to the question I posed a couple of paragraphs ago, about why such dubious settings make the best homeland for some characters of multiple identities, I arrive at a point where space and faith are two ingredients to make home, especially when both space and faith are interconnected, and when both have the same quality of having been dissected. A borderland, as Anzaldúa has put it, is created. Only the innate gravity of shared fate with the space makes one a dweller of such an ambiguous space. One can find that homeland with a name, such as Alajubek or Tome, or that homeland can be found within, as is the case for Dirmit. Her sense of belonging to the land, which paradoxically stands for not belonging, and her connection to the land's subterranean water through a hand pump leads her to insanity when she is physically taken away. Her forced migration to Istanbul, a metropolis, and her physical separation from Alajubek are not enough to break such a bond. Through her insanity, she finds her way back to the underwater of her homeland, and her inner earth keeps telling her where her roses are budding when she starts closing herself to her so-called reality. Thank you so much. That was all.
All right. Thank you so much, Tuba.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments for Tuba's paper? Francesca?
Hi, Tuba. Good
Hi,
evening.
Francesca. Good evening.
It's so nice to see you. You're still alive.
Same here.
Oh, sorry, you'll have to remind me because I've forgotten the beginning of your paper, but it was Mexican novelist. It's a Mexican novelist.
Yeah. So Far From God is by Ana Castillo. She is a Mexican American. She defines herself Chicana. Yeah.
Okay, Chicana. Okay. So when you say at the end in your conclusion about how the land and faith come together, right? I mean, presumably this is it's to do with.
I'm sorry, your connection is broken. I
From
can't.
my understanding of this, when I was in Chile, let me move. Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Sorry, yeah, I was too far away. Yeah, so my understanding of the animist, it's sort of animism is the religion of South America for the because it's their indigenous faith, indigenous religion. It's a spirit world, so it's rather like the sort of the Greeks, and the belief, you have the spirits in the trees, and etc. And so when I was there in Chile, I went to a funeral. It's a bit anecdotal, and I went to a funeral, and it was really interesting. I went to the wake after the funeral, and what they do, they have all this alcohol to celebrate the dead, but then you feed Pachamama. Pachamama was absolutely intrinsic to the rituals of life and the rituals of death, and so, as I said, before you could take a sip of this drink it was really rough. It was made from some sort of liquid coming from the tree bark and stuff like that. But if you had to feed Pachamama, and I wondered, because you're referring to this, the land and faith and how it comes together and how it becomes a land that is hospitable, that on the surface seems to be inhospitable with all the jinns and what have you. Is that sort of going to the heart of what you were trying to say? This idea of the faith and land and Pachamama and how it's an intrinsic part of their rituals and their lives.
Yeah.
Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. Actually, I based my opinions to Gloria Anzaldua's writing most of the time, because I am not so familiar with the Mexican American culture. I can only depend on the things that I have read so far. And again, depending on those readings, I can tell you that the native tradition includes goddesses or other divinities who are combined opposite sides. They are complementary in one entity. They are not dualistic. They nurture and devour at the same time. Those kinds of divinities are in Pueblo culture. However, they are also mestiza goddesses. They are mixed with Roman Catholic ideology. Yeah, that makes them more complicated than they are. And then there are other elements enters to the tradition, like Nahuatl language and the traditions as well after the Spanish, Roman Catholic, etc. And in Roman Catholicism, there is Arabic tints as well. The Moorish tints as well. So
absolutely,
they are all combined, and Gloria Anzaldúa prefers to celebrate those combinations. She doesn't want to exclude anything from the belief, and she accepts all the patches creating that whole belief in the end. She doesn't believe that they have to choose one or the other goddess, but then she is remained to Ana Castillo is one of the others believe in the same manner. They started to believe that there is a kind of Santeria going on. That means that there is a belief of saints instead of one God or a holy trinity or one goddess, one divinity. There are many saints. And then they start to decide who is going to be considered a saint. And then Chicana novels started to get populated with many saint-like female figures who suffer a lot. You know, suffering is a must for a saint to be. And those suffering female figures are presented as saints. So divinity is represented in Chicana novels for the last 2 or 3 decades in the form of female characters. And the characters I talk about, like Esperanza, Fe, Caridad, and La Loca, they are all saints, saint-like figures. They are all supernatural, but normal, in quotation mark, women. But they perform miracles, and the other people who cannot, that means the other people who don't suffer as much, look up to those figures in order to help their own problems. They ask their help, they ask their protection for their own mundane problems.
So these Chicana novels that you're describing, are you saying that they became popular about 30 years ago? Is that what you're saying? The Chicana novels you said were popular about 30 years ago, started to become popular. But is this philosophy is intrinsic to Mexico? I mean, because what I was discussing, it was completely separate. That the animists were had a very, very separate culture and belief system to the Roman Catholic. There was no combination. So if this isn't part of the magic realism, this is part of the philosophy of the period of Mexico, right? And other countries may be there, but certainly not in, it was very different to my experience. So this is part of the religion is combined, right? In the area, not just in the novel. Or is the novel bringing them?
I don't know many things related to South American literature. I read Octavio Paz, the Labyrinth of Solitude, etc. But he is a Mexican. But Mexican-American experience is a bit different than the other experiences going on in the Southern American continent, because their experience together with the United States and their lands being sold and their citizenship being sold to the United States all of a sudden without the citizens' consent. They make their citizenship or sense of belonging, if you like, more complicated than the citizenship of the other nations in Southern continent.
So the Central American thing is different from South America, absolutely. I had no idea that there was this combined religion. This is fascinating to me. So thank you for explaining that, Tuba.
Thank you for asking those questions. And
I know nothing about this kind of literature. So it's really, I'll try and find a copy of the magic realism. I like magic realism, but I know nothing about this whole genre. So thank you for that.
The only thing you don't know then.
Oh, I don't think so. There's a million things I don't know. Thank you so much, Tuba.
Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Comments?
That was a short paper and a short seminar.
I have a question.
Oh.
I mean, I could have many questions because as you were speaking, things popped up in my mind, like home, what it means for these characters in magic realism. I read Dear Shameless Death, but I haven't read the other books you mentioned. I'm not familiar with Chicana novels, but I find it interesting that this is a genre that became popular in Turkish literature and also Chicana, literature. So I'm wondering, why magical realism somehow is appealing to these cultures, why they choose to write in magic realism. I mean, how would it be like, let's say, Dear Shameless Death, for example, magic realism, how does it contribute to everything written in that book? I'm just wondering what you think about that. And then next, I want to ask you about this insanity you were talking about at the end of your paper. Can you elaborate on that?
I should tread carefully now, because because magic realism in contemporary literature is used very politically. You know, it is a kind of a way of survival for characters who find themselves in under oppression, and or not represented by their government in a way, or not owned by their government. They are left alone at a place where God doesn't know, so far from God, just like the novel's title, Anastasia's novel's title. And that is what it is. In Anastasia's novel, one of the methods of survival in such a situation is being a saint, just as I said. In Dermit's or Huat's situation is to create their own reality. Huat chooses to get connected to the reality that doesn't accept him. However, Dermit stays in her own world, which is populated with jinns and other weird creatures, hobgoblins, as I said. So that is the place that Anzaldúa calls borderland, because she does not belong, and she chooses to reside where she does not belong. She creates his own sense of belonging. And therefore she creates a kind of bond with the earth. Not nature, that's not what I mean, because earth is more important. She physically gets connected to the earth where she's born. And when she's taken away, she takes earth together with her, and she cannot get used to Istanbul, for example, although Istanbul can be a kind of borderland in many ways.
Dirmit, you mean Dirmit, right?
Yeah. I chose not to speak about the parts related to Istanbul because, just as I said before to you, that it would be very long, because Istanbul's, the metropolis being a borderland, is requires some talk about many cliches, like where that is the place where East meets West, tongue-tying kind of way where West meets East. That is a borderland. It is divided by a flowing body of water, and everybody is there, whether they belong to one another or whether they share the same experiences or not. And everybody shares different, everybody lives their own experiences in such kind of a borderland. And that is another kind of borderland, but I chose to stick to Alajuek because it looks like Tome in the sense, and in a sense. Therefore, I chose to compare only the two villages. On the other hand, in So Far From God, there is this experience of Esperanza in New York City. She's taken hostage in Saudi Arabia for a while, and she gets lost there. And there are experiences of these characters in magic, where magic realism is being used, let's say, and that is a part of another perhaps study, but villages without being owned by a government, they feel lost. There is no institution, no state apparatus mingling with things, so they are left alone but being left alone brings about other problems because they also live in a world where system works like a clock, and they are left alone in their own space. That their space is not ideal according to the system going on throughout the rest of the world, but those places are ideal for these people who are very happy, if not content. They feel at home in their disowned, alienated, small, lonely places like Tome and
Okay.
Alajurek. I don't know whether I could explain what you asked for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, I mean, I read Dear Shameless Death years ago, but as far as I remember, the ending was somehow important because Dirmit, by way of writing, because she starts to write right at the end of the novel. So by way of writing, I thought she found her own sense of belonging somehow, because until that moment, of course, she was oppressed in the village, she was oppressed in Istanbul, and too many traumatic things going on. And maybe magic realism somehow, makes it lighter, let's say, those traumatic aspects. But somehow when she starts writing, which is some kind of an artist coming of age, let's say, so I thought that's when she actually felt strong and she actually felt at home for the first time in the novel. I don't know what you would think of that, but that's how I remember at least.
Writing things on papers, pieces of paper, is a part of preparing magic. That is a magical act in the environment, in the universe of magic realism as well. Writing is something magical that is creating miracle, that you put pen to paper and you create meanings, you create words. That is magic.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That's when you start to create the magic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, there is another question here. Char asked in the Q&A, can you share some of the well-known Turkish novels that were written based on magical realism or magic realism?
He got lost during the Me Too wave. I can't remember his name right now, but Shadowless is one of his best examples of magic realism. Can you remember his name?
Shadowless?
Shadowless, Gölgesizler.
Yeah, I think so.
His publishing house stopped working with him. He is condemned and nobody likes him, but I still like his works because he uses magic realism very good, but I can't remember his name.
Well, there's one Gölgesizler by Hasan
Gölgesizler, yeah. Definitely. Hasan Ali Topbaş. He is one of the best ones. Latife Tekin writes this kind of novels. Berce Kristin Çöp Masalları is one of those. And I do believe that Beyaz Kale by Orhan Pamuk is a magic realistic novel. İhsan Oktayanar.
Yeah, right.
I cannot stop talking about him. Amat Suskunlar. I don't. His works are very difficult to translate into English, I believe, or any other language, because he is playing with the language in a so skillful way. So, these are the words, ones that came to my mind. İhsan Oktayanar is the best among them. I don't know whether she knows it or not. Hasan Ali Topbaş, yeah. Thank you, Char.
Right, somehow this genre appeals to Turkish writers, and that I find really interesting because it stands somewhere between fantasy and and fairy tale and sometimes utopia. It's interesting. And Latife Tekin is doing a great job. Although she's not writing that much magical realism any longer, right?
I would think that only Sevgili Arsız Ölüm and Berci Kristin Çöp Masalları, these are the ones that she uses magic realism.
Well, she published a couple of new books, but I haven't checked them yet. I didn't have any time to read them yet. Maybe she had some magical aspects, but I don't know yet.
I would recommend Elif Shafak's first and the only good novel, Pinhan. Is a good example for magic realism, I think. She uses all those kind of Bektashi and Mevlana myths and combines them to the Anatolian folklore, and she creates a beautiful LGBT kind of experience that is a beautiful novel.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for Tuba? I guess that's it, right? Okay, thank you very much. And thank you all for coming on a Friday evening. And it was a great pleasure to be here with you. And thank you, Tuba, again for this interesting presentations. Maybe we can talk more about this comparison of Chicana and Turkish novels. Well, goodbye everyone, and have a happy Bayram holiday.
Thanks. Bayramlar, everyone. İyi bayramlar.
İyi bayramlar, Francesca. Thank you.
Have a wonderful holiday. Thanks, Tuba. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, dear.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye. İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar.
I guess we just leave.
Yeah, they say thank you, and I try to write, but I can't see the screen, sorry.
All right,
Thank
I guess. All right, see you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ebruncığım.
Bye. You're welcome. Bye, everyone.